Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@usaprepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set, cocked, locked? Here we go. Your dial's set correctly to USA Prepares. Broadcasting 2 hours. Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. through 11 a.m. Central Time. And tape delayed all over the country. If you'd like to call us, 866-582-9933. 866-582-9933. Telephone listen line 24/7, 605-477-3249. Did you get a chance to see the Democrat circus on television the last 2 nights? It had a little something for everyone. Perverts, pedophiles, homosexuals, Hollywood writers. Oh, I already mentioned them 3 times. Plagiarists, dirty old men, former vice presidents. Well, I mentioned them twice. Illegal aliens, and the rest of us. I'm delighted to introduce to you our newest faculty member, Steve Elkins. Steve Elkins hails from Florida. And Steve graduated from Indiana University with a BS in nursing, specialized in intensive care unit and the emergency room. He loves technology when it comes to saving people's lives. He's been in the military, U.S. Air Force for 4 years, aircraft mechanic on the C-5 Galaxy, huge airplane, and the 141 Starlifter. He's been an EMT. He's worked in the ambulance service on the weekends. He had a political talk show in Northern California. He was inspired by our dear friend and instructor, John Stadtmiller, to make a difference. He reached out. He had a successful show. He called it Outside the Matrix 2.0, and it ran for 9 weeks. It was a solid broadcast, and it was shut down by the liberals who owned the station, and they claimed that it violated the 501c3 by educating people on the corruption of voter fraud. I'm delighted to introduce to you your newest instructor, Steve Elkins. Welcome, Steve.
Hey, Vincent. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Doing well. Steve, why don't we start this broadcast? I mean, we're going to get into some very serious topics about nursing, things that people have never heard of, never thought of, never considered, but need to know. But before we do, would you share with our worldwide broadcast classroom how you and I came to meet from your perspective? I know from my perspective, but how did it happen from your perspective?
Well, I think we have to thank John Stadtmiller for that. I'd followed your broadcast before and listened to your show on GCN, and I thought it was a darn good show. It's a great show. It's informative. It makes a difference for those who really want to make a difference in their lives, and as far as preparing for the worst, what's to come. And when I say the worst of what's to come, there is something coming, no doubt about it. You and I are both prepared, and it's good. It's a good effort. It's an excellent effort to be in that position to affect people's, hopefully, change behavior, where people start to say, "Wait a minute here, what we're talking about, the focal, what we see in the world here, and what we see nationally, is change, and it's bad change. So something is coming, and we're all getting prepared, and we don't want to be the ones waiting for government to step in to help us. We saw they failed miserably in Katrina and other disasters, and I think they're the worst. So I'm not even going to think about relying on government for anything. So but to take care of my own needs, take care of my family and my friends, of my immediate family and friends, of what I can do, and I do the best I can to educate people to be better prepared. So I commend you highly for what you're doing, Vincent.
Well, Steve, I appreciate that. And so from my perspective, John Stadtmiller called me last year, and he said, you got to meet this guy. You have to meet this guy, Steve Elkins. As a matter of fact, he'll be coming to your house.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like that. I said, okay, great. And so you and John ended up at our house and spent a few days and had a wonderful time. So I just wanted to thank John Stadtmiller for doing that.
Yeah,
but
good.
Did it happen similar to that with you?
Yeah,
did he tell you something like
this? I think it was a shock to you of how I ended up out there, but it all worked out really well. Like I said, we had some great times. I mean, the 5 days I was there, I think it was 5 days, went pretty dang fast, and we spent some time staying up late at night talking about issues, problems of this country, the world. And I found 2 o'clock, I was really still wanting to go, keep going, but I think your wife was kind of giving the eye, saying, you know what, you guys go to bed and start up again in the morning. The problems are still going to be there, but I had the best time, and I cherished that time I spent at your ranch there, and your boys and your family, and John. It was a lot of fun, and it was an educational experience for me.
Well, it was wonderful, and I just wanted to thank John Stadtmiller for making that happen. And literally, he said, "You've got to meet this guy. You've got." I mean, there was no wavering. There's no, well, you should, oughta. You have to meet Steve, and so I'm glad he did. And so here we are. So, Steve, here's a question for you.
Sure.
And I work on cars a lot, and there's a lot of relationships between automobiles and body mechanics, meaning people.
Yep.
So I was working on a Toyota with our son, and the new owner brought it over and wanted it to be checked out. And so our son pulled out the oil filter system, and parts were missing. And literally, the oil filter was not working. The oil filter was a cartridge. It was rolling around, rattling around inside the housing. It was missing the spring and a retaining component. So the oil filter absolutely was not working. But the last guy that put it back together left out 3 parts and put it back together, and it'd be good enough. Have you ever seen the evidence of anything like that in the medical world where serious mistakes were made, and you found out after the fact?
Let me think here hard on that one. Not mechanical-wise, maybe performance, procedure, but not actually a mechanical. I've not seen any mechanical failures that hindered me from doing my job or cost the patient a life. The equipment we have is pretty good stuff, and it's monitored closely, and there's lots of checks on it, and there's stickers on there. It's been checked, and so I have not seen any failure of equipment at all. No.
Okay. I lived in Virginia, and there was a hospital in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and the patient died on the operating table. And we've all heard that before, but this particular patient died on the operating table because of an electrical failure. Whoever wired the operating table, which is a stainless steel table, didn't wire it properly, and the patient was shocked to death. Have you ever heard of anything like that?
I have heard that before. I've never seen it, and they're supposed to be grounded. All that stuff's supposed to be grounded, all that equipment. Mm-hmm. So somebody failed. If electrical's shut off, there's a backup power for every hospital. That's part of that's a government requirement. You have to have a backup generator to kick on immediately after so many seconds. And but somebody not grounding equipment, like cauterizing equipment and stuff like that, I've heard of that. I've never seen it personally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and class, just so you know, hospital outlets are a different color. Typically, they are kind of a gray in color, and they are a very, very durable, long-lasting, high-quality, top-quality outlet. And they may cost 10 times more or 20 times more than the outlets that you have in your home. And they have a special provision for a separate ground wire to go all the way back to the panel. So they are made so that these kinds of things, these kinds of failures don't happen. Steve, how about the Dominican Republic? So people have hopped on airplanes, flown from the United States down for it's just a wonderful time in the Dominican Republic. They end up sick as can be, and 12 of them so far, if not more, have died from organ failure. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, actually, I've heard of that actually happening in Mexico. I had a trip to Mexico back in the 80s, and one of the people in our group of party there, my sister got married there in Puerto Vallarta, had got sick, become very ill. And it was interesting that they ended up in the emergency room of a Mexican hospital there. Of course, they wouldn't be treated until they gave a Visa card, and they had to make sure the Visa card had enough on to actually charge for the services. But, yeah, I've heard of that happening, and usually it's kind of in areas of the world that sanitation is not a priority or very much compromised. The Mexicans don't get sick from drinking their own water. Their kind of immune systems are kind of used to that. You know, we're kind of like pedigrees. We go over there, and if you drink their water, you're going to get violently ill, dysentery. But, yeah, I have heard of that. It's usually in third world countries, kind of like that situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm wondering if part of the reason that Mexicans drinking their own water don't get violently ill might be attributed to the hot pepper that they consume on their food. Do you think there's anything to do with that, or do you think it's
actually,
just their immune system?
I think has the ability to kill a lot of things. I just got a formula off the internet the other day. I'm trying to figure out how to eradicate pests in my yard, and one of the ingredients, a homemade ingredient, was using cayenne pepper and a couple other ingredients mixed together. Let it sit for a couple of days, and then spray it on your yard. And the capsaicin, evidently the hot ingredient of a pepper, evidently is a deterrent or kills bugs. So I'm going to give that a shot this weekend.
Yeah, and by the way, Steve, tobacco is used in a lot of insecticide manufacturing. It literally, it really is. Have you heard of tobacco being used for bee stings? So, for example, you're out in the yard and you get stung by a wasp or a hornet, and if you take a pinch of chewing tobacco, wet it, put it right over that bee sting, put a Band-Aid over it, that the sting is likely to not be as painful as otherwise? Have you heard of that?
Yeah, that works. Also, tea does too. Regular wet tea, you take regular drinking tea, that works. What else works? I actually found, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I found a remedy for, I hear your bumper.
Yeah, well, we've got about 10 seconds.
All right, meat tenderizer works great on bee stings and fire ants, as their venom is protein-based. And, of course, we know that meat tenderizer breaks down protein.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back with Steve Elkins. Steve Elkins is with us. He's a broadcaster on Republic Broadcasting Network, and he's a nurse. And we're talking about medicine, things that you've probably wanted to know about, but haven't had a place to ask. So I'm going to try to ask some of those questions today and see if we can cover a lot of it. Steve, we're talking about bee stings, and you mentioned meat tenderizer. So I've heard of that.
Meat tenderizer, actually, the venom of many insects is protein-based. And so, of course, meat tenderizer breaks down collagen, it breaks down protein. So I found that if you wet the area and put meat tenderizer on it, just leave it on there, or you can actually put something over it to kind of keep it mashed in place, that it actually works really well. I'm using it for fire ants. I got a problem with fire ants out here in Florida, so I'm using that for my treatment when I get bit. I understand it works for wasps and hornets also, but try meat tenderizer.
What what is your advice on snake bites? Every once in a while that happens. It's not as often as bee stings, but do you have advice for snake bites?
Well, the first thing I do when I'm doing a lot of work outside and I've got debris, I got a big burn pile out back right now, that the first thing I do so I don't the first thing is not get bit. Okay, that's the first thing I like to do. And the first thing I do is go out there is take a rake and I make a lot of noise on that pile to make sure that anything in there is going to crawl out and take off. And that's usually what works, the first thing. They don't like to bite people any more than they have to. I mean, they only usually do that at a threat. So the first thing is not get bit. Second thing is, depending, you have to be able to identify the snake. I've been bit by snakes before, and I know the ones to worry about. We have coral snakes, we have copperheads out here, and we have rattlesnakes. So I'm very cautious of those. The first thing I said is just make a lot of racket, a lot of noise. Anything, if you have a lot of lumber out in your backyard and you say, well, I need to move that lumber and I got to put it somewhere else, the first thing I do is, if I don't have a firecracker to throw to really scare them with a loud bang, I take something and I rap on that wood really, really hard, and whatever's under there is going to take off. So I think the first thing is just to make a lot of racket, make sure you don't get bit. And then the second is identification, and if it's a poisonous snake, you're going to want to get to the hospital pretty dang fast. The anti-venom, you're going to want to get that introduced pretty darn quick, and you should have good success. I've seen a couple of these where people, like I said, didn't take my recommendation on that. They lifted a bunch of boars, and they lifted up a board, and there was a rattler right there. It got him. So on the hand, he was camping. Like I said, make a lot of noise, because I think that's the number one thing to make sure they scatter and don't stay silent, because if you lift a board up and there's one there, he's going to latch out at you.
And in your neck of the woods, as John Stadtmiller would say, God's waiting room, Florida, a lot of people wear flip-flops.
Yep.
To me, where I live, that's absolutely crazy because of snakes and all kinds of critters that can bite you. And so another thing is that we don't wear flip-flops here at the house. Nobody even has them. I mean, if we see them in the store, we keep walking right past them. Steve,
well, you're skipping over actually one other accident there that's not even mentioned is slips. You get a little bit of water under a flip-flop. I'd say I've seen people just take a tumble really hard. So, the flip-flop thing is it can be very dangerous, not only in the environment, walking around in just high grass. Not a good idea, but just in your grocery stores. I mean, how often do we see stuff on the ground that's spilled or somebody made a mess and nobody sees it, nobody spilled it, nobody cleans it up, and then somebody with flip-flops comes around the corner and boom, breaks an arm, breaks a leg. You get an elderly person who breaks a hip, and life changes when you break a hip at 80 years old.
Steve, I probably do something that's not very polite, but when I see somebody wearing flip-flops, I just subtract 10 or 15% from whatever I thought their IQ was. I just make that subtraction because it makes no sense to me. Because typically when I see people, I'm out and about, like shopping, at Sam's Club or at the Chinese factory outlet or wherever I happen to be. But I just mentioned those two places because they're big. And I see people there, and those places, you really don't walk to them. You really don't ride your bicycle to them. So the people who are there have driven there. So if they've driven there and they're walking around in their flip-flops, they've driven with their flip-flops, which really means that the transition from the accelerator to the brake pedal can be neutralized with flip-flops. And you can have a crash because of something so stupid as wearing flip-flops. We'll be right back. Steve Elkins is with us. He's an ICU nurse. He's also an ER nurse. And, Steve, I was reading an article about this physician. And he practices in the Amazon, and there are plenty of tropical diseases there. And many of his patients have experienced snake bites. And so what he does, his treatment is an electric shock therapy. So what he does is when someone's bitten by a snake, he discharges 4 or 5 low current but high voltage discharges, kind of like what a taser would do.
Yeah.
and he gives them about 5 to 10 seconds apart at the location of the snake bite, and it saves the lives of the victims, and it works within a half an hour. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I did, through you, and I think that probably works through constricture, most likely. You want to make sure that the venom doesn't get into general circulation, so I would assume that I've actually got one of those stun guns. I have never tried it on myself. I am curious a little bit how much of a jolt they really put out, but I could see that possibility, possibility of that. Basically what it does is constricts the vasculature and prevents the venom from actually distributing through the body. I could see that to be a possibility, yeah.
Okay. Steve, there are plenty of medical procedures that people undergo because of recommendations by the medical profession, probably their doctor. Are there any of those that you can talk about that you would say, you know what, I'll pass. Thank you anyway. I don't want to do it.
Yeah, I think. I think at 50 years old, as poor as the diets are in this country, Vincent, as bad as the diets really are, Americans are terrible. They eat a lot of junk food, and we know some people who do a lot of junk food, don't we? But
yeah, he's probably going to be listening.
So we can talk about him. I love him.
Yeah,
he does have a bad diet, and I've told him, you got to stop this. These high-fat diets are terrible, and they're terrible on the GI. So understanding how bad the diets are and how people are getting diverticulitis because they're not able to evacuate all this fecal matter out of their colon, their small bowel and their colon. We're seeing more diverticulitis, and of course that could be really serious if it punches through the wall completely of the colon. And then you get a situation we call sepsis, and sepsis shuts down organs, and sepsis can kill you. So I would probably recommend that one because Americans are just, well, first of all, they should just change their diet practices, but they're not. So I guess I would have to recommend that one for a lot of people because I just think people are just have poor diets. Other procedures, I think there's been a big push to do carotid Dopplers to prevent strokes, to see if there's occlusion on either side of your left or right carotid artery. And that's pushed quite a little bit, but some people are at high risk and some aren't. So what else can I think of offhand? The upper and lower endoscopy, like I said, for the colon and the stomach. A lot of stomach stuff out there. A lot of stomach, a lot of colon stuff. If you've noticed the commercials on TV, Americans, they got stomach problems, acid problems, and they can't poop. So there's a lot of problems in the GI area all alone right there. But those simply could be taken care of if people just started eating correctly, and they could eliminate that whole GI issue right there off the bat.
Steve Elkins, do you think that some of these GI gastrointestinal issues are a result of, and let's just name the names, like McDonald's with, heck, you've seen the images, class, of the McDonald's hamburger that's been left in a wrapper for years, and the wrapper's unopened, and it still looks like it did when it was put in the wrapper. Yeah. The preservatives that are in our foods, all of our foods, so that they can stay on the shelves in boxes and in packages for a long time. Do you think that those preservatives are destroying our ability to digest food? Do you think that's a problem?
Definitely, and the fat content, and there's a lot of preservatives going in there. There was some talk, long ago, we learned about MSG through the Chinese food chain of these buffets and how they use it as a flavor enhancer, but it's also to have storage in long term as far as putting it back in the refrigerator and pulling it back out next day or so. So people are attentive, I think, to the MSG, and they're mainly worried about, I get headaches from MSG, but you're doing a lot more damage. The MSG is not a good thing. You shouldn't have it in your food at all. It is a flavor enhancer. It may taste good, on the food, but it's actually really bad for you. But like I said, the diets alone are just poor. Generally, you ask Americans, how often do you eat out per week? And they're going to say 2, 3, maybe even more times a week, We are polluting, we're killing ourselves through what we're taking and ingesting. We're not even talking about water. and the fluoridation, all that stuff being added to the water. And I have a big problem with people who destroy medications down the toilet, and I've had a show on that once before, how to properly dispose of medications. And we're seeing a big increase of people that don't get this education, and for some reason there's no public service announcement from government to say, hey, don't do these things because they can't filter out in your water treatment plants. So we're seeing high levels of this and this medication in our drinking water. So yeah, everything around us, the air, the chemtrails overhead, we got the water issue, and then of course we got the toxins in the food, the hormones. I'll tell you a true story of back when I lived in Utah, working in ICU there. I had an 8-year-old girl that came in. I can't remember. She should have gone to like a peds ICU, but for some reason she came to us, and we were treating her and taking care of her, and she did well. But her mother came to me and requested maxi pads or a tampon for an 8-year-old. And I said, are you serious? And she was. Her little 8-year-old girl had gone through the stage of being a woman here and having periods. Now, an 8-year-old, that's not a normal thing. 12, 13 is normal. At least it was when I was a kid growing up. And now I'm seeing 8- and 9-year-old girls starting their period. So we know the hormones in the poultry and the beef, and these things are affecting hormonal changes in girls and possibly even boys.
I remember reading, it must have been 2 decades ago, about Puerto Rico and how young girls, the age you're talking about, 8 years old or so, were menstruating, and their breasts were developing very, very quickly. And they traced it. The researchers traced it to the chicken, because chicken is consumed a lot in Puerto Rico, and the chicken, to make the chickens develop the breast meat, the white meat, faster, bigger, more profitably, was done with hormones. Yeah. So the young girls, the families ate the chicken, and heck, just go to the Chinese factory outlet class and look at the men, and you will see man boobs. Steve, I'm a little older than you are, but you can probably think back to elementary school. There was no such term as man boobs. No such thing, right?
No, there wasn't. I had a talk with Deborah Traveris on this whole issue, and I'm pretty big on the anti-vaccine here and unnecessary vaccines, because I think that's another issue we can talk about some other time. But I am convinced, at least the theory I have, and I threw it by her, and she's pretty active in the movement, that these vaccines that we're throwing at young men, and now, I went from probably having 8 vaccines total in my life to now I think it's 70 vaccines by age of 18. I think it's up to 70 now. And I think my theory is that some of these vaccines, in combination or singular, are being given to young men at a time when their bodies are going through change through puberty. And what we're probably seeing here is a tweaking of the estrogen and a decrease in the testosterone, because the young men I'm seeing today are very feminine looking. They have feminine hands, arms, hips, very little facial hair. They have very feminine characteristics. And it's not just one here and there. I'm seeing a whole group of young men that just don't look manly at all. And that can't just be genetic, by accident. Something is causing that. So that's a little theory I have.
Absolutely fascinating. And do you think that also leads to this, what I would consider an epidemic of sexual confusion?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it doesn't help that you have a government who's actually promoting it, encouraging it, and of course these school boards are, having classes now, and they're trying to teach young minds, mold young minds to, experiment. And then Hollywood makes it trendy, and it's hip to explore the other side of sexuality. Try it, There's all kinds of information out there that they're just shoving at us. It's not an abnormal thing anymore. It's very normal. And no, it's not. It's not normal at all, and I'm not going to go into the religious aspects of it, but it's not normal. It's abnormal, and when I hear people get angry if I use the word queer, well, look back in the dictionary, Webster's, and queer means odd and abnormal, and that's exactly what we have, odd and abnormal behavior, sexual behavior. It's not normal, but they want to make us believe that it's normal. It's the new norm, and I get a little irritated when I hear people say, well, that's the new norm. These are changing times. They're not changing times. You're changing the times, and you're trying to bring us down as a nation, because we're not. I mean, look at this nation. I went to Walmart the other day. I look around. I see women with tattoos and piercings. And I mean, it's a major increase in the Jerry Springer population. What has happened to this country? It's hard to hold your head up and say I'm an American, because what is America now? You know.
Well, Steve, I've got to tell you, I've mentioned this many times, that I avoid going out to eat as much as possible. I've got to be past starving to go to a restaurant, because I know what happens in the kitchen. I know what the people look like in the kitchen. I know that I'm already going to be grossed out by the waitress with the tattoos and the piercings and the tongue ring and all the rest of that mutilation. The orange hair, the blue hair, the green hair, the multicultural hair, whatever you want to call it. I don't like it. I don't want to be subjected to it, and I avoid it, because I think I'm going to get a disease from these people. Because if they're willing to do the mutilation to their bodies, what else are they going to do? I mean, what do they care about?
I would say a lot of that times those behaviors, those cosmetic things, lead to a risky lifestyle, not a healthy lifestyle choice. I agree with you, and I don't like to eat out either. I very rarely do. I like to cook. I'm a kind of a chef, so I like to cook at home.
Yeah. I know that you and I think John and Mrs. Finelli all went shopping for ingredients for dinner one night.
Yeah, we did.
And, you all cooked. When we come back, I'd like to talk a little bit more about risky behavior, if that's all right with you.
Sure, sounds great.
Yeah. All right. Steve Elkins is with us, ICU nurse. Steve Elkins, we're talking about risky behavior, and I would consider being tattooed and pierced risky behavior. Would you as well, or not? Yeah.
It's interesting the history behind tattoos. First, starting off with the Navy man. You know, they actually started off with an eagle or something like that, something patriotic. And a lot of Navy guys back in World War II got the patriotic tattoo, and it's simply changed quite a bit now. These people are like walking canvas nowadays, with what they've got on them. And yeah, that's a risky behavior, and who can tell how many times they got, or how many of those people are probably positive for hepatitis because of somebody with bad needles and whatever. But I would say, yeah, that was a risky behavior.
Okay, I understand that there's strong evidence linking hepatitis B transmission and hepatitis C transmission and syphilis from tattooing. Do you think that's true?
I know that the hepatitis B and C, I've seen a lot of that in the hospital. The syphilis, no, I don't believe so. I think that's more of a sexual encounter type situation. That is on the increase, by the way, and chlamydia is both on the rise also, both those two things. So, Vincent, I'm going to throw a question at you. When's the last time you saw a public service announcement where they actually told people to start practicing safe behaviors to make sure or minimize the risk of picking up a disease like this? You never see anything about it because, well, there's a lot of commerce that goes along with it. It's a lot of money being made off of bad behavior and bad choices. And the government doesn't seem to care about that at all.
Yeah, I don't understand. I mean, boy, this is going to sound terrible, but, Adolf Hitler really wanted his country to be absolutely strong, powerful, the best. He really wanted Germany to stand out. He was all for Germany. Germany above everything else. But it seems like the United States, we don't seem to care about us. We don't seem to care about having the best food, the best medicine, the best education, the best morals. We don't seem to care about that. We seem to. Yesterday I talked about the lack of loyalty. People aren't loyal to each other. And I understand why they're not loyal to corporations. I'm not. I've practiced and I preach not being loyal to corporations because corporations have taught us not to be loyal to them. So, for example, if you have an insurance company and you have homeowners insurance, they keep raising the rates because you're loyal. But the new guy that's thinking about buying insurance, he'll get a better rate than a loyal guy. Or the cell phone company, if you're loyal, you're going to pay higher than if you shop. So they have taught us, corporations have taught us, big corporations have taught us not to be loyal. But that has passed down to individuals not being loyal to individuals. And that is tearing our country apart. Yep. And you're absolutely right. You're right.
You know, you mentioned something interesting. I did catch your show yesterday about loyalty, and I agree with you 100%. There was a time back in the day of my grandfather. He was a brigadier general in the military, Army. A man of great character. I loved my grandfather, a very solid man, a man of his word. And it's interesting that back in the day, his day, and even in my father's day, loyalty, there was a thing called honor. And we didn't have the need for all these liars or lawyers, per se. We had a little thing called the honor code. When you made an agreement with somebody, you would put your hand out, you would give them a firm handshake, you would look them in the eye, and your word was your bond. It was your honor to uphold your word. For some reason, that's now we have lawyers drawing up contracts, and now we're finding people looking for wiggle room and gray area to get out of the contract. Where's the loyalty? Where's the honor?
I'm going to do something I didn't plan to do, Steve Elkins. So I had an appointment yesterday. A guy said that he was going to come over to the house, and I said, okay, that'd be great. Thursday afternoon will work. He didn't show up. So I sent him an email, and the email said, I used his first name, and I wrote, my mistake. I waited for you today. Vincent. That's all I sent. And then I got back an email that said, I'm so sorry, I was swamped. I didn't calendar this correctly. I can come over your way tomorrow evening and be there by 6 or so, or around the same time Saturday, Sunday, Monday evening. Let me know if one of those works for you, and I will get out your way and look forward to meeting with you. And then he signed it. And I sent back an email first to his first name. 4 people changed their schedules to make our appointment work yesterday. All wasted time. No, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday will not work. We are farmers, and all of us are busy cutting, tedding, raking, baling, and moving hay from sunup till dark now. We'll have to reschedule for some time when you can actually show up. Vincent. Okay? That's my response. I have no patience anymore for this nonsense. You're talking about honesty, integrity, loyalty. It's lacking. We'll be right back.
Hour number 2 of the USA Prepares. Class, the broadcast quality is down considerably because the internet is down. And I've already mentioned that the local county newspaper, that's 8 pages long, devoted one whole page of the weekly newspaper. It only comes out once a week. And 1/8 of the newspaper was devoted to the lousy telecommunications services that CenturyLink provides. And here's just one more example. It just went down right at the tail end of the previous hour. So this hour, I will be connected via plain old telephone service, not through the internet as we usually do. Steve Elkins is with us. He's an ICU nurse, an ER nurse. And, Steve, there's a woman who was morbidly obese, 596 pounds. And this woman could do two things. She could eat and sleep by herself. Everything else required care. So that meant that she could not relieve herself by herself. I mean, she could relieve herself, but she couldn't wipe. She couldn't clean herself. It required many people to help her. And all she did was lie in bed. And so she had this, she used to weigh 751. Have you ever seen anything like this?
I have many times. My last time I saw it was in Eureka, California. I was called into the ER. Actually, they went up on the floor and they found some of the bigger guys. They said, I need you, and you. Down to the ER right now, stat. So we go down to the ER. And I walk into the ER, and there's a bunch of firemen down there with a big, giant tarp. And I look over on this gurney, this very large woman that's overlapping the gurney, and people are on both sides to make sure she doesn't fall off. And she weighed over 800. And we had to move her, put her on a military tarp, this heavy-grade tarp, to move her to another gurney, a bigger gurney. I've seen this several times. And these people, she didn't actually live very long. She lived a couple more months. But the congestive heart failure issues, the pulmonary issues, they all have sleep apnea. And this woman, all she did was she never left the house. People used to bring her food. They basically catered to her, and she just got bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah, I've seen it several times.
So, Steve, if you were to hypothecate as to the cause for this morbid obesity in this woman that you're talking about, that you had firsthand experience with, what would you say it is? What is the cause? Or what are the main causes?
You know, some people treat their depression in different ways. Some people do other behaviors. Some people just eat away. That's the way of coping with their pressure, their depression, their problems. And my guess is this woman, I believe she did have a mental illness. She was something wrong with her, but she was an eating machine, and she was filthy, and she was growing yeast everywhere, and she had numerous health problems, and one that finally took her life. And she was very young. She was in her early 40s. I'd say probably depression. People eating through their depression. A lot of it.
When someone gets to be 800 pounds, they had to pass through 700, 600, 500, 400, 300, which is still a lot, to get there.
Yeah.
Do you think that they realize that, boy, you know, I used to be 150, you know, before I was 200? And do you think they realize that they are doing this, and each day is more weight than yesterday? Do you think they realize it, or does it creep up on them and they have no idea how this happens?
You know, when you get to that size, your metabolism slows down, and everything you eat pretty much sticks to you, to your ribs. I would think the numerous changing in sizes of clothes and having you buy more clothes and more clothes and more clothes would be the deterrent to say, you know what, I'm going to spend a fortune on getting new clothes. I mean, I look in the mirror, and if my jeans are just a little bit tight or something, I say, you know what, I need to scale back a little bit, cut back on something, and exercise more or do something else to lose that little bit of weight. I don't go out and buy new clothes. I just simply say, you know what, I got to go do a couple things, adjustments here, and I'll lose the weight, and I'll be fine again. And that's what I do. Evidently, some people don't do that, and they just keep buying more. And, of course, they invented stretch pants and spandex, so you can stretch quite a bit into those spandex and those stretch pants.
Mrs. Finelli and our son and I went into one of those thrift stores. It was Habitat for Humanity, and I walked in. I was behind them. I was looking at something else, and they walked in first. And as soon as I walked in, they said to me, there's something here that we know you're going to want to buy. And I looked right over, and I said, there was a scale. There was a hospital scale. I'm talking about a balance beam scale, the kind that they'd used in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And I saw it, and I went right over to it, and that's what they were talking about. And it was brand new. This thing was calibrated. It was brand new. It was from the local hospital, and they were getting rid of it. And I think they were getting rid of it because it was functionally obsolete. I believe it only went to 250 or 300 pounds. probably 300.
Yeah.
I think that scale was not usable in today's world because it only went to 300 pounds. Does that make sense to you, or
well, like hospitals act like government sometimes. They have a budget, and to increase their budgets, they have to get rid of equipment, and whether it's necessary or not. Sometimes they might say, "Well, we're updating. We need better equipment, and this isn't necessary, and this is obsolete now. We'll get rid of it, and we'll get something high tech." It's a way to boost your budgets. Government does this all the time, but talking about these huge, massive people, and these people are getting bigger and bigger. I mean, 300, 350 is not a big deal anymore. I see these kind of people size all the time. That's getting to be common, normal. Excuse me. But our Hoyer lifts, we have a Hoyer lift where I can pick a patient up and move them. They only go to about 300 to 350 max. So you have to use a lot of personnel to move somebody who's 800 pounds or more.
I just
and then you get injury. You get a lot of injury problems.
While we were talking, it's 300 plus 50, so it's 350 pounds. But I think it's functionally obsolete in a lot of cases, this particular scale. I use it every day. I love it. I mean, this is one of those, it measures your height. It has the height attachment. It's got the, this is the old-fashioned. Maybe it just takes a little too long to get it right. Maybe the new crew just graduating and entering the medical profession doesn't understand that, it's not like a smartphone. You actually have to know how to slide the weights over to get the balance beam to work. Maybe it's too complicated for the new group. I don't know, but boy, I'm so glad they got rid of it because I really like it. Well, I've used the Hoyer lift. I know it is. In class, let me just explain it. So this lift is, if you've ever seen an engine crane,
yep.
It's got a base. It's got some wheels. You can wheel it around because it's a pretty substantial piece of gear. It's got a hydraulic cylinder that you pump up, and it's got a long arm, and it's got a chain on the end of the arm, and you can put a sling on there, and you can put a person, put a tarp or I'm sure there's a specialized piece of gear for that, and you put it under the patient, and you hook the chains to it, and then you crank it up with the lever on the hydraulic cylinder, and it's like lifting an engine out of a car.
Yep.
There's not much difference. The Hoyer lift would be stainless steel and probably 50 times more expensive than the lift we use to pull an engine out of the car, but it's exactly the same principle.
Yeah, same one.
So I have a relative who was a nurse all her life. That's all she ever wanted to be. Loved doing it. But she used to complain about her back. Now, she's not a little girl, so she's not a 125-pound girl. She's, more like 160, bigger girl. And she was having trouble flipping and rolling over patients because the patients, were 3-4 times her size.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm not exaggerating.
That's a problem with females in the field. That's why we guys in the field are always getting called, hey, can you help me turn this patient because they can't do it? And they're definitely limited. Most women are limited, and they call on us. And I get no hazard pay for what I do. And I tell you what, I've been hurt a couple times, and you saw me. I'm not a skinny weakling. I'm a pretty strong guy. But you talk about enrolling a 500 or 600 or up to 800-pound person. You're going to need some guys, you're going to need some muscle, and you're going to have a routine of how to do it. There's a sequence how to do it. And you're going to have to be careful because you can still get hurt. And I guarantee you if something goes really wrong and you were to lose control of somebody that big, the momentum of that person, well, you're looking at a huge lawsuit, that's for sure. But I've been hurt a couple times, a few times. So it's very dangerous, and I know that most females can't handle something that way. They can't do it.
You mentioned hazard pay. In all seriousness, what are the hazards that you are exposed to that really make being a nurse risky for you and your family?
I'd say radiation exposure. I do wear a lead vest if I go into any procedure rooms where we're using, the scanning devices. That's a risk. I'm finding that a lot of guys who work in the cath lab have to wear these lead aprons all the time, and they're constantly leaning over. They're getting cervical problems, neck problems. displacement, subluxation, things like that. There's always the hazard of needle sticks. You got to be very, very careful of the needle sticks. Definitely the musculature from lifting and turning people, that's an injury. That's what's forcing a lot of people out nowadays. The older nurses are saying, I'm out of here. If they haven't gone into administration yet, they're saying, I'm leaving the bedside, and I've done my time at the bedside in the war zone. I'm going to do administration, and then I'm going to retire. So those are the top ones I can think of offhand. It's hard. If you do 12-hour shifts and the sleeping, and if you work a night shift, and of course we have 2 shifts, the night shift, and you have to change your sleep patterns, and that's not good on your immune system. I can tell you right now, that's going to shorten your life. Working nights all the time, it's going to shorten your life. Not good.
I know a nurse who was taking a patient's blood. This was probably 30 years ago. And she jabbed the patient as normally would be done. Nothing out of the ordinary. The patient flinched, and that was right after he was stuck. The needle went into the nurse, and she got hepatitis. Just like that.
Yeah. Known a couple cases like that. Seen a couple. I've always been very, very cautious. I have a certain way that I do things, and I've never, ever been in that situation. But I've seen it, and I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going a break, and we're going to be right back after these few short commercial announcements. Hey, we're talking about preparedness today. Steve Elkins is with us. He's an ICU nurse, an ER nurse. And we've been talking about how dangerous it is being a nurse. Steve, so what can you bring back to your family from the patients? What risks do you become exposed to that unwittingly you may bring back to your wife or family?
Well, she's a nurse also, Vincent, so we got double exposure here in my household. But with I'm going to say with the increase of homelessness in this country now, we've seen some great video footage, and it's really, really sad to see some of these major cities like Los Angeles and Oakland, and I think Seattle had one now, has a big problem with homelessness in the camps. And the homeless are coming in, and they're positive for TB, tuberculosis. So that's a worry whenever I care for somebody who's homeless. I'm taking precaution. I'm wearing a respirator, a certain type I have, and I'm just going to assume that they may be positive because, the alternative is, I'm tested here and there, but if you come positive, then you're going to be put on a medication. I mean, it's a year-long regimen of taking the pill every day. So that's a hazard that's increasing, TB, in the homeless crowd.
I was at Habitat for Humanity, and it seems like hospitals get rid of really good stuff. And they had cases of these surgical masks.
Yeah.
And they were, I think, 5,000 of them for $5.
Good deal.
That's what I thought. So
you're going to send me some, right?
Do you need some?
No, I've got a ton.
Okay.
But I would buy them for $5 for 5,000. They come in handy. Yeah, I would buy them.
Sure. And so we have those. So what precautions should the general public take when they go to the hospital? Okay, so a loved one or a friend's been admitted for whatever the reason, okay, and now it's visitation time, and many people feel it necessary to perk up the spirits of the hospitalized person. What are the risks for the visitors, and what precautions would you recommend that visitors take?
Well, it all depends on the diagnosis. If it's nothing that's communicable disease or something like that, you never have to worry about that. I think one of the things that I would suggest to family members is to actually, doctors come in, they give you 10 minutes, 15 minutes tops to talk to you, the patient. Family members are usually not there, so you need to schedule that time to be there when the physician is actually there, because what I find is that the patient is sick. He's in a different environment. He's out of his own element now. He's stressed, and much of what he is told about his condition and his progress or his treatment modality possibilities kind of goes in one ear out the other. He's in overload, so he doesn't quite absorb it. So if you ask him later on, what family come in and ask, well, what did he say to you? The doctor said, well, he said a lot of things, and I'm not sure. I got a little bit here and there. So what I suggest is family members finding out the time when the doctor does his rotations and being there at that time. Several of you sit down and talk to the physician and get it all. Everybody gets informed of what's going on, the situation, and what the treatment modalities and possibilities are. The lack of information is, it can hurt your situation. And you definitely have to ask a lot of questions these days.
And what I was thinking about is just walking into the hospital. It's like a building full of diseases, right? Mm-hmm. Airborne.
Yeah, it can be. And we got a serious problem with Staph aureus, and you've probably heard about that quite a bit. Surgical people, and even though they scrub here and there, staph and of course fungal infections are up. Just coming in, washing your hands. I got to say, one of the biggest things I did a show once about how to try to stay healthy during the flu season. The determined flu season that they always tell us it's coming up, and so they push their vaccine. But there are so many things we can do, and one of the basic principles, one of the basic things we could do is proper hand washing and making sure that our hands are clean and not putting it in our mouth and exposing these bacteria, these germs to our immune system. But I'd say hand washing is number one right off the bat.
All right. Hold that thought. We'll be right back. Steve Elkins is with us, and we're talking about health. He's an ER nurse and an ICU nurse. Steve, as I think about restaurants, I think about the waitress or the waiter coming up to the table, scratching his or her head, scalp, ears, nose, mouth, and then saying, "May I take your order?" And, of course, my answer is no, thank you anyway, and then I leave. What about those kinds of things that visitors at the hospital may do? Just rub their nose, but before that, they pushed open a door, they used the elevator up button or the down button or selected the floor or used the restroom handle, doorknob, those kinds of things. What are the risks of just transmitting infection, disease from touch? And then
very high. I was just going to mention that on coming back out of the break, that wash your hands, wash frequently with soap and water to get the debris off, and then maybe use the alcohol sanitizers they have there in the hospital too. They're actually pretty available nowadays. But yeah, these door handles, they've actually done some tests on the door handles, the drapes, all kinds of apparatus that you would not think about it. And you're right. I forget the statistics on people. Men are especially really bad at this. I don't know why. Women are a little bit better, but the hand washing after going to the bathroom, I don't know why. That's not something that people practice. It's just like, I go to the men's room and you see somebody just kind of walk out and say, "Wait a minute, you didn't wash your hands." It's all too frequent. So keeping that in mind, those door handles, anything that's tactile, you have to touch. I'm very hesitant about touching those things, and if I do, I'm washing my hands right after. I'm not a germaphobe, but I just know the importance of proper hand washing and not transmitting to other places.
And if you look down, if you look down as you approach the urinal, you'll probably find that the next step that you take is going to be a wet one, and then you're going to walk through. Wherever you walk, now you are carrying that urine from the previous users of the urinal wherever you go, and then maybe even back into your home. So just, watch your step. How about that?
That's true. And that which brings the question, where are all those drips coming from? Why is that happening? Well, you get all these old men who have enlarged prostates, and they can't relieve their bladders kind of completely, so they get a little dribble effect there going. And so that little, just below the urinal itself, there's a puddle. Yeah, you're right. And you got to watch your feet straddle that thing, and you're going to track it all over the hospital. Yeah.
And and bring it to your car and bring it back home.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that also, because I have a practice in my house. My work shoes do not come in the house. They stay outside. They will never make it in the house because I do not want to track anything that might have stepped in, walked in, into my home. So that in that situation, I'd say leave your shoes out in the garage.
I had a customer in Virginia. They made carbon brushes for electric motors, for starters, alternators, electric motors of all kinds. So there was a lot of carbon in the air. And the carpeting in this particular factory in the administrative offices was black. The molding was painted black because everything, there was carbon everywhere, just black carbon everywhere. And the employees would have two sets of footwear. One that they would wear at the factory, which was black, typically black lace-up sneakers or boots, black. If they didn't start out black, they'd be black, so they might as well just start out black. And when they would walk to the car at the end of their work day, they would sit in the front seat of the car, feet outside on the parking lot, and they would have a bag, and they would take their shoes, put them in a bag, and then put the plastic bag, and then put the bag in the back of the back seat of the car on the floor by the back seat, and they would put on another pair of shoes that they would wear after work. So they did not want that coming home. They didn't want to destroy their house, their car, and that's a good visual for what we should be thinking about when we work in those kinds of situations as you do. What are your thoughts about mold being a cause of illness, mold in air conditioning systems, heating ducts?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you can go back to the days of in Indianapolis where we talked about Legionnaire's disease. It happened in a hotel downtown Indianapolis. So water sources and then stagnant water will grow mold, and mold spores will reproduce. That's a huge problem. Yeah. I'm going to give you a little story here real quick, and that how hospital administrations rarely listen to the staff. We have some pretty good ideas, and we're very health conscious. It's always amazing that the ones who are in charge never are health conscious. They don't have the medical backgrounds we do. But there was a hospital I worked at out in California that decided cosmetically they thought this will be nice, appeasing to the customers. That's what they are, customers. But they decided to put carpet, this really, really low carpet, in the hallways all the way through the hospital. And it's so funny because they did not think this through. First of all, it's a hazard because not only is it's carpet, it's going to have a hard time with the gurneys, pushing the gurneys, but it's also going to absorb like a sponge. And we know there's all kinds of things dripping in hospitals and IV bags and things that are coming out of other bags, urine bags, whatever. And so these things should get to be sponges. And so if a hospital is worried about an infection rate, why in the heck are they putting carpet in their hospitals? So we told them about it. Don't do it. They didn't listen. They put it in. Infection rates started going up. They started saying, hey, I think these nurses know something we don't know. We shouldn't have done this. But before they got to that point, because that was a little bit of embarrassment for them, so that was one thing they had. They knew that they made a mistake. It turned out to be a sponge and a bacteria trap. They decided, well, you can't even push the gurneys on these carpets. They're just so heavy. They hold down everything. They just kind of stick. So what do? They spend a lot of money on these really expensive battery-controlled gurneys that you just push a button and it actually pulls it across the carpet. So they spend all this money to put it in for beautification and for the public to be impressed that their hospital is such a beautiful place, but at the same time they were also causing another problem of infections. So, excuse me, bottom end, we took it all out, we ripped it all out, put back tiles in, tiles that you can actually mop the floor with sanitizer, and remember what a hospital really is. It's a place to come to get healing, or treatment. And so forget this whole thing of looking beautiful and all this stuff. That doesn't matter. Results matter. So they got back to doing the right things.
You mentioned curtains before, and I believe that, and I may be wrong, but I don't think so, that curtains between, like, let's say you have a semi-private room, meaning two patients in the same room, but there's a dividing curtain for privacy.
Right.
I'll bet you they don't get cleaned very often, do they?
They don't. I brought that to their attention once too, and thought I'd like to do if I was going to go for my master's, I wanted to do a little testing here and actually get some of the curtains and then have them tested by a lab. My guess is they're not, and I think they supposedly say once every 6 months. I don't buy that. And I've mentioned that they're a bacteria trap also, because if you do something, and even what you do, let's say you're doing a procedure with gloves, I always take my gloves off, throw them away, wash my hands again, walk out, do the curtain. But a lot of people may not do that. They may actually do the procedure, their hands are tainted, they come out, they close the curtain, open the curtain up, walk out, just dispose of their gloves outside the room, which you should never do. It's practice, but a lot of people have bad practice. So then you're actually creating more of a problem there. So I suggested going to a kind of a plastic, even if a colored plastic, so you can have privacy, and something that could be sprayed and wiped down pretty easy. And it never happened. My suggestions never were taken serious, I guess.
Well, I'm thinking about, as you're mentioning this, I'm thinking about the gal. Usually it's a gal, young person, walks around with the blood pressure equipment, and that so many times in doctors' offices, not necessarily hospitals, but in doctors' offices, you get the blood pressure cuff that was used by the 5,000 people before you.
Yeah. Yeah, actually what they've done now, they've gone to, evidently they've listened to us on that one, and that they're really inexpensive, the cuffs, the plastic cuffs to throw away, that we've actually left one in the room, and it's just for that patient. And even if you walk into a clinic, they should put a new one on and put it on you. If they don't, they probably do sanitize it with some kind of spray and wipe it down. At least that's something. But hospitals have gone to basically issuing you, every patient, a disposable cuff that'll be, you can replace them anytime you want to, but for the life that you're there in the hospital, the time you're there in the hospital, you have your own cuff.
And I'm thinking about the hospital, HVAC system, heating, ventilation, cooling system. It seems to me like everybody's breathing the same air. So if you're down the hall from somebody with TB, you're going to be breathing the same air as that patient with TB, whether you're a visitor or a patient or a hospital employee, right?
Okay, well, let me correct you on that one, because what we have in the hospital, in the ICU, we call them negative pressure rooms. The air does not circulate with the general population of any other room. So if anybody has a respiratory disease, a respiratory pathogen there like TB, they are put in a negative isolation room, and their filtration is totally different from the rest of the hospital. But there's only so many of those rooms. That's the problem, is we're seeing more of those TB patients, but we don't have as many negative flow rooms, they call them negative flow rooms, in the hospital that we should have. We probably need to have a lot more of those. So that's a little myth if you think, if they're diagnosed that their air is being circulated in the rest of the hospital or in other rooms, it's not. If they're in a negative flow room.
Yeah, and I've seen patients where they have these signs on the door that let you know that yes, this is a communicable disease patient, and they did not have enough of those negative pressure rooms.
Yeah.
So I have seen that, and of course you see the hospital staff, the nurses, take off. They'll wear these yellow. Typically, I've seen them as yellow. Maybe there are other colors. They'll put on a gown to go visit the patient, and then they take the gown off and put it in a trash container right outside the patient's door. Is that typical procedure?
Normally, they should be taking that gown off, those yellow gowns, the big bird gown. Inside the room, there's a special room there where we would put all that stuff in, and then it's disposed of later on. It should not leave the room. Usually those are the people that are positive C. difficile that we have to wear those gowns. And as a TB patient, actually, we wear a mask going in, and if we transport that patient anywhere in the hospital for procedure, that patient needs to wear a mask. That's not a choice. They have to have the mask on because we can't have that those little critters floating around in the respirations, in the general air.
When we come back, can we talk a little bit more about C. difficile, also known as C. diff, how you get it, what happens to you when you get it, and can you ever recover from it? Got to be right back with Steve Elkins, ICU nurse, ER nurse. Steve Elkins is with us. He's a broadcaster on republicbroadcasting.org. And in the past, Steve has invited me to be on the and when he fills in for John Stadtmiller. And he and John Stadtmiller and I have all been on the air at the same time on John Stadtmiller's broadcast. So if you want to find out more about him, go to republicbroadcasting.org, and you can look at the schedule and find out when Steve's on. He's on the weekends. Steve, C. difficile, absolutely miserable if someone contracts it. What is it, and what can you overcome it?
Well, it's Clostridium difficile, and they are spores, infectious spores found in fecal matter. They can also be found in air, respiratory droplets, water, soil, human feces, and animal feces. And basically, it is a serious problem in the hospital. We're seeing that along with the Staph aureus. Hand washing is huge. Of course, there's two entrances. A lot of times of this bacterium itself, either through the nose or the mouth. So it is very serious. It can kill. It can be very life-threatening. And it is an ongoing problem in hospitals. It might be likened to the runs. And class, if you've ever smelled the most awful, foul-smelling defecation, there you have it. Is that close to being accurate? Yeah, it's got a funky smell to it, no doubt. It's kind of like a GI bleed. It has a funky odor to it, too, the digested blood coming out. Nasty smell. You'll never forget it. Once somebody points it out, this is C. difficile. The diarrhea, the fever, the pain, the abdominal pain. A lot of it's actually created by the overuse of an antibiotic, which I think a lot of physicians now are finally saying, we had a problem with overuse of antibiotics and creating resistant bugs, critters like that. So hopefully that's getting better, that we're not overprescribing, and that problem will get a little bit better. But the antibiotics kill off they kill off the bacteria. That they have good flora and you have bad flora. When they kill off the good flora in your gut, then you're more susceptible. And of course, anybody who's immunocompromised, let's say if you're on chemotherapy, you're a good candidate to pick up C. difficile. So they're doing actually fecal transplants. It's something kind of new in the last couple of years. It sounds kind of nasty, but they actually put it in a capsule. And I can't imagine. I had a friend who actually did it and took the capsule and swallowed it, and I think you just swallowed a capsule of poo. That's supposed to dissolve in the colon there in the small bowel, and hopefully give her reintroduce good flora into her gut and get rid of her C. diff problem. So that's the newest technology that I know of. Steve, I hope we'll have a chance to do many more of these broadcasts. I've got so many questions, and you have just great wisdom. So I hope you'll consider coming back again and again. I love broadcasting with you. I really do. Steve, one of the questions that we all have is ER in the full moon. Is there a difference between just any other day of the month and a full moon experience in the emergency room? There actually is. I can't put any science on it. It's just what I witnessed my own. A full moon night, we have more code blues, we have more violence, and we also have a lot more violence on extreme hot days. And I think you see that across the country. I think there's an irritability factor on the heat one. With the heat index, people get very irritable and they get violent. But we have no explanation. There are more babies that are being born. Actually, in the hospital, we play a little nursery rhyme for the birth of a baby overhead. And it's kind of a nice feeling. You go, that little baby was just born right now, coming into the world. And you get one, and you get two more before the night is over. They're born in threes, and they die in threes. We don't know how that works. But I get 3 code blues, and I get 3 brand new babies in the night. Can't explain it. Been doing it for 26 years, but I have no clue how that all works, but there's something there.
Well, I've long known about it happens in threes. Deaths in a family, one person will die, and then another person will die, and then a third person will die. And there is something to it happens in threes, and I can't explain it either. Yeah. Steve, you mentioned diverticulitis. There's also diverticulosis. Can you tell us quickly what is the difference between an itis and an osis?
Itis is actually inflammation. It's the inflammatory process. You can have diverticulitis, what you would call diverticulosis, because it's not in the inflammatory stage. When it becomes an inflammatory stage, it brings a lot of pain and suffering, which we know somebody that had that problem last week. Those little diverticuli pockets are basically packed with fecal matter that can't escape, and it becomes very irritative. And at a point where if they keep getting deeper and deeper, the pockets, the diverticuli, they'll actually punch through the colon wall, and then you have a situation where you're releasing now fecal matter into the general circulation, and you get sepsis. So the itis, anything with itis, I-T-I-S, is inflammatory process.
Okay. Appendicitis. Okay. So, Steve, I'm looking forward to being back on the air with you again and again and again. Thank you so much for spending 2 hours of your day today with us here at USA Prepares. Absolutely brilliant broadcast. Again, thank you for being my friend as well.
Thank you, sir.